David alludes to a really hard reality in Psalm 6. In Psalm 6, he says this. In verse 5, "Among the dead, no one proclaims your name. And who praises you from the grave?" And the hard reality there that David is alluding to is that when a person dies, you can no longer hear their voice. Maybe you know how hard that is. There are people who, long after a person dies, they keep their cell phone number going, because on their cell phone, for their voicemail, they recorded a message, just their voice saying something simple like, "Hey, this is such and such. Leave a message and I'll get back to you when I can." They refuse to close off the cell phone account because they want to call their voicemail and hear their voice, because they miss them, and because they know that when a person dies, you can't hear their voice anymore. This is one area where Jesus is such a unique blessing. Just think of some of the people whose voices their loved ones were able to hear again after they had died, like Lazarus. Multiple days after Lazarus had died, Jesus came in and he spoke to the grave, and Lazarus came out, and Lazarus was alive, and he began talking. The widow's son. One day Jesus walks into town and there's a funeral procession. A widow's only son had died. And because she was a widow, of course, that wasn't her first funeral, and that little boy wasn't the only person she was missing, whose voice she was missing. She had also at some point said goodbye to her husband. But then Jesus told the boy to get up. And he listened. And eventually he would have started talking again. They would have heard his voice after he was dead. The daughter of Jairus. "My little girl is sick," he said to Jesus. And then she died as they were on the way back to the house. But that wasn't the end. Jesus walked into the house and told the little girl to get up. And she did. They gave her something to eat. And after she was revived, she likely would have started talking. All these different people whose voices were not silenced by the grave. And of course, the reality is that your loved one, those who have died in faith, the grave hasn't actually silenced their voice. Jesus said, "All who live and believe in me will live even though they die." In other words, Jesus sees it as just continuing, just their life continues to go on. Even though they die, they keep on living. Of course, they're living in a place where, well, you currently can't hear their voice. Not what they're saying, not what they're singing. But God can. And we know two things. We know that, based on what the Bible tells us about eternity and what's coming, their voice is full of joy. Their voice is full of joy, as vibrant and energetic and joyful as it has ever been. Even if that's not how their voice sounded at the end. Their voice is full of joy right now. And the second thing we know is that one day you will hear it again. You'll be right next to them. Your voices will blend together as you're in some position around the throne of Jesus, around the throne of the Lamb, erupting in songs of grateful praise. to the one who made that happen. And of course, we know that that will happen. Why? Because after Jesus died, and his voice was silenced, the world heard it again. I think of Mary, blinded by her grief in the garden. After the tomb was empty, after the disciples had left to, gone running to tell the disciples that the tomb was empty, Mary, she stayed behind. And Jesus was there, but she didn't see him. She didn't recognize him, even though she had seen him with her eyes so many different times. She thought he was the gardener, and asked the gardener, "Can you tell me where you put him, please?" And then Jesus said her name, Mary. And then she recognized him. There was life in that voice. It's the same voice that gave the best life of all to your loved one. And the same voice from the same risen Savior who has promised the very best life of all to you. And it's coming. One day you'll hear their voice again. And together, your voices will sound more beautiful than we could ever imagine. Something to look forward to. Rest well tonight, my friends.